we are going to learn an easy way to convert from one metric measurement to another. When I do that, I like to use a mnemonic device, and the one that I've chosen to use is a sentence. The sentence is typed up in the top of your screen, and it's King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. And if you notice, when I typed out that sentence, I made the first letter of each word a different color because each one of those letters represents the uh, the prefix to the base unit that we'll be using in class. For instance, the K in King stands for kilo, the H in Henry stands for hecto, the D in died stands for deca, the B in bi stands for base, the D in drinking stands for deci, the C in chocolate stands for centi, and the M in milk stands for milli. Now before we move on, there are a couple things I want you to notice. The K, the H, and the D at the beginning of our sentence, King Henry died, are in capital letters. The reason I put those in capital letters is because those are the larger metric units. Then on the other side, drinking, chocolate, and milk all have smaller letters because those are the smaller units, the deci, the centi, and the milli. Now this word base, if you're wondering what that means, that's simply the base unit that we're going to be using, the measurement unit. And there are three that we use. The first one is meters. And that's represented by the letter M. The second one is grams, which is represented by the letter G. And the third one is liters, which is represented by the letter L. So if we take any one of those base units, a meter, a gram, or a liter, and add a prefix to it, that will tell me if it's either larger than that base unit or smaller. For instance, if I use the term meters and I put a K in front of it, it is a kilometer. A kilometer or kilometer is larger than just a meter. On the other hand, if I add a small m to my base unit of meters, that represents millimeters. That's a very small unit. It's smaller than the base unit of a meter. So if I'm measuring distance, which a meter is the measurement of, and I measured it in kilometers, it would be a very large distance I was measuring. For instance, from here to another city. However, if I'm measuring something very small, like the width of an eyelash, I would use the smallest unit, or a millimeter. So those are the different prefixes that we use with the base unit. So now let's learn how to go from one unit to the next very easily. So I have some example problems here. But before I do my example problems, you'll notice at the bottom I have some letters. K, H, D, B, D, C, M. And those are the letters that we represented up here with our sentence. But I don't want to write the sentence out every time I'm doing these problems. So if I can just remember the sentence, I will write out the first letter of each word to make it easier for myself. And you should use this, especially when you're first learning, in order so that you don't make mistakes as you go along. So let's go to my first problem. 20 meters equals how many kilometers or kilometers? And when I do this, what I like to do is I like to rewrite the number first. That's the very first thing I do to give myself some working space. The second thing I do is I'm going to find my decimal point. Normally that's pretty easy to find because it's very obvious. However, in this case, there is no decimal point shown. When you have a whole number written out, usually the decimal point doesn't show. But the decimal point always goes to the far right of the number in a whole number. So now that I've identified where my decimal point is, I'm going to look what unit I'm starting at and what unit I want to get to. So I'm and when I do this, I actually, especially at the beginning, say this in my head. Little m stands for meters. Notice I don't have another letter in front of it. It's just a single letter M that stands for meters. If it was millimeters, you would have two M's, and that's something students often get mixed up, so please be careful with that. And maybe say the unit in your head when you're first learning how to do this. So I'm starting at meters, and meters is my base unit, which is right here. And I want to go to kilometers, and if I look at my letters at the bottom, kilometers is to the left of my base unit, and I have to figure out how many spaces to the left it is, and that's how many spaces I will move my decimal point. The way I like to do it is I start at at meters here, and I'm going to physically draw an arrow how many spaces I jumped. So in this case, I jumped 1, 2, 3 spaces to the left. So now I'm going to go back up to my number, find my decimal point, that'll be my starting point, and I'm going to go to the left 3 spaces. Before I pick up my pen, I'm going to draw my decimal point nice and large so that I don't get it mixed up with my starting point. But if you'll notice on this one, I have an empty space. And when you have an empty space, you need to fill that in with a 0. Okay, but I'm not done yet. Oftentimes, students will leave their work looking like this, and that's not a proper answer. So you want to rewrite the number so that I know that you understand the process. So I'm going to rewrite my number. I'm going to put my decimal point in here. So in this case, the answer is 0.02. Now I could write it 0.020. That would be correct, but it's unnecessary to have that extra 0 on the right. Okay, I'm going to go to my next one down here where it says 0.3 grams equals how many milligrams. And notice again, I said it out loud. You can say it in your head. You don't have to do it out loud. And the first thing I do is I'm going to rewrite my number and locate my decimal point, which is obvious in this case, my decimal point being right here. Then I'm going to look to see where I'm starting at grams. And if I'm going to clean this up so we don't get mixed up. So on my letters here, grams would be a base unit. So that's my starting point. And I want to go to milligrams. Mg is milligrams. And the little m is to the right of my base unit. And now I just have to count how many spaces it's over it is. So I start at my base unit. I go 1, 2, 3. I jumped 3 spaces, this time to my right. So I start at my decimal point. I'm always starting at my decimal point. And I move 1, 2, 3 spaces to the right because that's how I did it on my letters. Drew in my nice big new decimal point. And again, notice I have some empty spaces, so I have to put zeros in my empty spaces. But again, I'm not done. I need to rewrite my answer. So now my new decimal point is here. My answer is 300. You do not need to write it with the 0 in front of the 3 because I would never look at a whole number and see it written in that form. So that would not be correct. The answer is simply 300. Okay, let's jump up here and do another one. Here I have 4.83 milliliters equals how many liters? So I'll rewrite my number identifying where my decimal point is. Again, in this case, it was obvious. Look to see where I start. I'm starting here at the small m for milli, and I want to go to liters, which is a base unit, which is right here. So I'm moving to the left, 1, 2, 3 spaces to my left. So I start at my decimal point. I'm going to move 1, 2, 3 spaces to my left, drawing in my nice new larger decimal point. filling in my empty spaces with zeros, and then rewriting my number. I'm going to write it over here so I have a little more space. So in this case, my answer is 0.00483. Okay, finally, let's do one more. My starting number is 0.078 decagrams equals how many centigrams? So I'm going to rewrite my number, locating where my decimal point is, again, obvious in this case. Then I'm going to look to see where I've started, and notice this is a capital D, so I'm starting right here, and I want to go to a small c for centigrams, so I want to go all the way over here. So I'm going to be moving to the right. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 spaces to the right. So I find my decimal point, and I move 1, 2, 3 spaces to my right, make a nice new big decimal point, and then I have to rewrite it. It's a whole number. It's simply 78. Again, in a whole number, you're not going to write the zeros in front of it. So I hope this has helped you. If you need help, please refer to this as often as you can. And good luck with your problems.